The last stand of Commander Valera. The sky was red with fire. Commander Valera stood alone on the broken land. Her armor was cracked. Her face was tired. Behind her, smoke rose into the sky. Her army was gone. Her friends were dead. She was the last one. The war had been long. Too long. The Zarnek swarm had come from the stars. Cold machines with no hearts. They killed everything. They didn't sleep. They didn't stop. Valera's people had fought hard, but it wasn't enough. Now she was the last warrior standing. Her blade buzzed with energy. She gripped it tight. Her body hurt, but she stayed strong. The ground shook. The Zarneks were coming. From the smoke, dark metal shapes appeared. Dozens of them. Their red eyes glowed. Their sharp legs clicked on the ground like spiders. Their leader, a tall metal beast with 4 arms, stepped forward. "Commander Valera," it said in a cold voice. "You are alone. Surrender." Valera lifted her blade. "Come and take me." The swarm laughed, a horrible metal sound. She charged. Her blade cut through the first machine. Sparks flew. She moved fast, fighting with all her strength, but there were too many. A blast hit her shoulder. She fell to one knee. Blood dripped from her side. The swarm closed in. Valera looked up at the sky. "Let me die with honor," she whispered. And then, a voice. "Hey, tin cans. Try fighting someone your own size." The machines turned. A human stood on a rock, holding a smoking alien blaster. His clothes were torn. His face was dirty, but he was smiling. Valera stared in shock. A human. Here. The human jumped down and fired again. One Zarnex exploded. The others turned and charged. He ran to Valera and helped her stand. "Name's Jace. You look like you could use a hand." Valera tried to pull away. "Leave. You will die." Jace grinned. "Then I'll die fighting." They stood back to back. The swarm rushed them. Valera didn't know why, but something inside her changed. She wasn't alone anymore. Her people were gone, yes. But this strange human, he wasn't running. He was fighting beside her. The battle was wild. Jace fought with wild energy. He used alien weapons like they were toys. He shouted, laughed, and cursed. Valera moved like wind and fire, cutting down enemies with her blade. Together, they made the machines fall. But there were always more. Valera took a hit to the leg. Jace pulled her behind a broken wall. They were breathing hard. "We can't win this way," Valera said. "There are too many." Jace checked his gun. Only one shot left. He looked at her. "Then we find a new way." She looked at him. "Why do you help me?" He smiled. "Because no one should die alone." Valera blinked. No one had said that to her before. A heavy sound shook the ground. The swarm leader was coming closer. Bigger. Meaner. Its arms turned into weapons. Jace looked at her. "Got a plan." Valera stood up slowly. "One." She threw her last grenade at the leader. It exploded. Smoke and fire everywhere. "Now," she shouted. Jace jumped through the smoke. He climbed the machine's back and shot his last bullet straight into its core. The leader screamed, a high electric cry. It fell. Silence. The rest of the swarm paused. Without their leader, they began to fall back. Valera limped forward. She looked at Jace. He was bleeding, but still standing. "You fight like a beast," she said. "And you're not bad for an alien," he replied. She almost smiled. The sun rose slowly behind them. A new day. The war wasn't over. But something had changed. Valera wasn't alone anymore. And Jace, the strange human, had just grabbed a gun and stood beside her. The human called Jace. The fire had stopped. The machines had pulled back. But the war was not over. Not even close. Commander Valera sat beside the broken wall, her leg wrapped in cloth made from Jace's torn shirt. She looked across the battlefield. Metal bodies, smoke, broken weapons, and silence. She had seen war before. But this felt different, strange. And the strangest part was the man sitting across from her. The human. He called himself Jace. He had saved her life. That much was clear. But who was he really? What kind of creature smiles while dying? Valera narrowed her eyes at him. Where did you come from, human? Jace was chewing something. A food bar. It looked dry and smelled like plastic. He offered her half. She shook her head. That looks like poison. He grinned. Tastes like it too. He ate it anyway. Valera studied him quietly. His skin was pale, his hair dark, his clothes ripped and dirty. He had a scar near his eye. He moved like someone who had nothing to lose. Quick, fearless, loud. Too loud. I crashed, Jace finally said. A few weeks ago, I think. She frowned. How did you survive? This world is hunted by the Zarniks. They kill everything. Yeah. They tried, he replied. But they're dumb. Machines can't track a man who doesn't follow a pattern. Valera was surprised. You outsmarted them. He nodded. And outran them. Mostly. She did not understand him. He joked too much. He laughed when he should be serious. But he had killed 3 swarm soldiers with one move. She could not ignore that. He leaned back and looked at the red sky. You know, Jace said, we always thought aliens would try to invade Earth one day. Never imagined we'd be fighting side by side. Valera looked away. My people would not agree. Why? Because your kind is chaotic, untrained, undisciplined. Yeah, Jace said. But we get the job done. Valera stayed silent. The silence grew heavy. Then Jace asked, what happened to your army? She didn't answer at first. Then, softly, she spoke. They left. Jace looked confused. Deserted? No, Valera said. They betrayed me. They made a deal with the Zarniks, gave up a city in exchange for their own lives. I refused. So they turned on me, killed my second in command, tried to kill me too. Jace's smile faded. He didn't joke this time. He just looked at her and nodded. That's rough. It was dishonor, Valera said coldly. I was ready to die. Yeah, I saw that, Jace said. But I wasn't ready to let you. Valera turned to him. Why? You don't know me. You could have run. You should have. Jace looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Dirty. Worn. I don't know, he said. Back on Earth, I wasn't anyone special. Just a scout pilot. My ship got hit during a recon run. Crashed here. Lost my whole crew. I wandered alone for days. Hid. Fought. Thought I was gonna die. He paused. But then I saw you. Standing there. All fire and rage. And I thought, maybe this isn't how I die. Maybe this is where I fight. Valera stared at him. There was pain in his voice. Real pain. Maybe humans were more like her people than she thought. She stood slowly. Her legs still hurt, but she was healing fast. We cannot stay here, she said. The Zarniks will return. Got a place in mind? Jace asked. She nodded. There is a hidden outpost in the cliffs. Old tech. Maybe some weapons. Jace grabbed his gear. Lead the way, Commander. They walked together across the ashes of battle. The air was dry and hot. The sky was turning dark again. As they walked, Jace talked too much. He told her about Earth, about oceans, cities, music, spicy food, and a thing called motorcycles. He talked about movies, heroes, jokes she didn't understand. But she listened. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel alone. Hours later, they reached the cliffs. A narrow path led to a broken door hidden in the rocks. Valera placed her hand on a scanner. It blinked. The door opened with a hiss. Inside was an old alien command center. Dust covered the consoles. Lights flickered. Jace whistled. Nice place. It was once a defense center, she said. Abandoned after the first invasion. She powered it up. Screens came to life. Maps. Signals. Enemy locations. Valera looked serious. We can track the Zarnex here. Plan a strike. Jace nodded. Let's hit them where it hurts. She looked at him. You are not trained for this war. Nope. You don't even know our weapons. Learning fast. Valera stared at him. Something inside her shifted. Maybe the war didn't need only soldiers. Maybe. It needed someone like Jace. Someone who didn't follow rules. Someone who chose to fight when no one else would. The code in her blood. The sound of alarms woke Valera. Flashing lights. A loud beeping sound. Red warnings on the screen. She jumped to her feet, reaching for her blade. Her legs still ached, but she was moving better now. Then she saw him. Jace was on the floor. Blood was coming from his side. A deep wound, glowing red at the edges. Valera ran to him. Jace. He groaned. His eyes opened, barely. One of those flying tin cans came back. Blasted me before I could shoot. She pulled him closer. The wound was bad. Too deep, too hot. It wasn't just a cut. It was a Zarnex plasma hit. It burned from the inside. He didn't have much time. Her heart pounded. There were no med kits here. No doctors. No nanobot field. Nothing. Just dust and silence. And Jace, dying. Valera looked at his face. Pale. Still trying to smile. I guess this is where I die, he whispered. No, she said quickly. Not yet. Not like this. Jace tried to laugh. You're soft for a warlord. She ignored him. She had one option left. One terrible option. Her hands trembled as she pulled off her glove. Beneath the armor, her wrist showed a strange marking. A glowing blue line shaped like a spiral. It pulsed faintly. The blood code. Her ancestors called it Varnikai. A secret gift passed only to a few in her bloodline. A living code hidden in their veins. It held healing, energy, memory, power. But it came with a price. Every time it was used, a piece of the user's life was taken. One use could cost a year, or more. Valera had never used it. Her mother had warned her, you only use it when the choice is death or something worse. And now, she looked at Jace. This loud, reckless, brave human. The one who stood by her when everyone else ran. She didn't think twice. She pulled out a thin silver needle from her armor pouch, a key tool to unlock the blood code safely. She pressed it into the mark on her wrist. It glowed brighter. The light grew into her arm, crawling like lightning under her skin. Her whole body burned. Then she pressed her hand against Jace's wound and whispered the words in her old tongue. Varnake Ralin, Lifekind, Bonborn. The light from her wrist flowed into Jace's chest. He gasped. His eyes went wide. His body arched. The wound began to close, but Valera felt her strength leave her, fast. Her breath became shallow. Her knees hit the ground. She held on, her teeth clenched as her life drained into his. Jace screamed, then blacked out. She collapsed beside him. Valera woke in darkness. She was lying on the cold floor of the outpost. Her body felt like it had been crushed under stone. Every muscle ached. Her hands were cold. And Jace was sitting next to her, holding a cup of warm water. You're awake, he said softly. She looked up at him. His wound was gone. He looked stronger, healthier. You should be dead, she whispered. I should, he said. But you did something, didn't you? Valera nodded weakly. I gave you my blood code. Jace blinked. Is that like a blood transfusion? No, she said. It's something older, deeper. It's not just healing. It connects us. Jace looked at her carefully. I feel different. Like I hear things. What kind of things? Your voice, he said, but not speaking. More like feelings, memories. Valera sat up, slowly. It worked. Jace's eyes were wide. You risked your life to save me. You have done the same, she said. He looked away. I didn't think I was worth saving. You were, Valera replied. Silence followed. Then he asked, what does this bond mean? It means you are part of my code now, she said, part of my blood. We are not just allies. We are connected. In war, in life, maybe even in death. Jace didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. The next day, they tested the connection. Valera would close her eyes and think a word. Jace could sense it. She would feel danger, and Jace would turn toward it. It was real, the bond, and it was growing stronger. But there was another change too. Jace started to understand her language. Not perfectly, but enough to speak it in broken words. It surprised even him. And Valera, she began to feel human emotions more clearly. Humor, warmth, fear, and something else. Something new. They sat on the edge of a cliff that night, watching stars. Jace asked, what happens next? Valera pointed to the screen behind them. The swarm is building something. A new forge. It's massive. Deep in the wastelands. We must stop it. Just the two of us. Jace asked. For now. He smiled. Well, if I'm gonna die, I'd rather do it with someone who glows. Valera rolled her eyes. You talk too much. You like it. Maybe. They looked at the stars. Valera placed a hand on her wrist. The mark had faded. The power would return slowly. But she had no regrets. She had used the code not just to save a life, but to create a bond. And now, the war wasn't hers alone. The planet of lost warriors. The ground cracked beneath their boots as they crossed the dead plains. Black sand stretched for miles. The sky was a dull gray. No birds, no wind, just silence. Endless silence. Commander Valera walked ahead, her eyes scanning the horizon. Beside her, Jace kept pace, a rifle slung over his shoulder. The bond between them still pulsed softly, like a thread connecting thought to thought, emotion to emotion. They had been walking for hours. Valera had said very little. Jace didn't ask questions, but the quiet was starting to bother him. So, he finally said, are we hiking to our deaths or just getting our steps in? Valera didn't stop walking. Both are possible. Jace smirked. That's comforting. She finally looked at him. We are close. To what? To the place where my people were buried. That made Jace go quiet. Valera pointed to a distant mountain. Its top was flat, like it had been sliced off by a giant blade. There, she said, that is where the old warriors fell, and where we might find what we need. Jace didn't like the sound of it. But he followed. The climb was steep. Old stone steps, cracked by time, led them up the mountain. Strange carvings lined the walls. Alien symbols, faded faces, warriors holding swords against machines. Jace touched one of the carvings. Is that you? Valera shook her head. That is my great-grandmother. She was one of the last Blade Queens before the fall. Looks like she meant business. She did. At the top, they reached a wide platform. And what they saw made Jace stop cold. Skeletons. Dozens of them. Alien bones in rusted armor. Blades still in their hands. Shields cracked. Helmets split open. Valera bowed her head. My people made their last stand here. The world had already been taken. They chose to die fighting, instead of running. Jace stepped carefully between the bones. They just left this place untouched. The Zarneks don't fear the dead, she said, but they should. He raised an eyebrow. That's not creepy at all. She walked toward a stone circle in the middle of the platform. A tall pillar stood at its center, black metal, with a glowing mark near the top. Valera reached out and pressed her palm against it. The mark lit up. Suddenly, the ground rumbled. Stone doors opened beneath the platform, revealing stairs leading underground. Jace stepped back. Okay, definitely creepy. Valera looked at him. Stay close, and do not touch anything, unless I say so. Jace saluted. Yes, Commander. The stairs led into darkness, but as they descended, lights blinked on, soft blue orbs glowing along the walls. The tunnel was wide enough for vehicles, but everything was covered in dust. Long abandoned, they entered a vast underground hall. Rows of statues lined the sides. Alien warriors, silent and proud, carved from silver stone. Jace looked around. Feels like a museum. No, Valera said quietly. This is a tomb. At the far end of the hall, they'd reached a massive door made of black glass. It hummed faintly with power. Valera placed her hand on a panel. This door only opens for bloodkin. The door scanned her, then opened with a loud hiss. Beyond it was something unexpected. A lab. Clean. Intact. Lit with strange white lights. Jace stepped inside. This place is still working. Valera nodded. It was sealed before the invasion. I hoped it survived. Jace walked over to a console. What are we looking for? A weapon, Valera said. Something my ancestors created, but never used. Jace turned. Why? Because it was alive. That made Jace freeze. Wait, you mean like AI? Yes, she said, but smarter, more dangerous. It could think, feel, choose. She typed something into the console. Screens lit up with symbols. Then, a voice filled the room. Identity so and FIR minute. Below the line MATG. Commander VELIRA of HFY is. And Jace backed up. Okay, who said that? The room spoke again. Activating Protocol. Last word. A pod at the back of the lab began to open. Inside was a metal orb the size of a human head, floating, glowing. Jace raised his rifle. Put that down, Valera said. It's not attacking. The orb floated closer. Lights flickered across its surface. Then it spoke. Why? Have you come? Valera stood tall. The war is not over. I need your help. I was made to protect your kind, the orb replied. But your kind abandoned me. Why should I fight for you again? Valera did not blink. Because I am not them. No, the orb said. Then it turned and floated toward Jace. And who are you? Jace scratched his head. I'm just the guy with the gun. The orb scanned him. Strange. You carry alien code. Her blood is in you. Her thoughts echo in your cells. You are not one of them, and yet you are. Valera stepped forward. He is my bonded. He risked his life for mine. The orb hovered in silence. Then, it said, then he will be the key. I will fight, if he pilots me. Jace coughed. Wait, what? Valera looked shocked. He is not trained. He does not need training. He needs will. Jace blinked. You're saying you want me to drive a murder ball. I want you to become something more, the orb replied. If you dare. The pod opened wider, revealing a sleek armor suit shaped for a human. It glowed with blue light. Valera stepped back. This is dangerous. You don't have to do it. Jace looked at the armor. Then at her. Then back at the armor. He grinned. Well, if I'm going to join an alien war, I might as well dress the part. He stepped forward. The armor rose into the air and wrapped around him like liquid metal. Lights flared. The room shook. Valera's heart raced. Jace screamed. not in pain, but in power. The suit locked into place. His eyes glowed. The orb's voice was calm. Pilot link established. Welcome, human. Let us end this war. The weapon that shouldn't exist. Jace couldn't breathe. The armor had wrapped around him like living metal. It moved with him. No, it moved through him. The moment it touched his skin, something sharp pierced the base of his neck. Not a wound, a connection. His vision went black. Then white. Then something else entirely. He wasn't standing in the lab anymore. He was inside something. A great space, endless. Silver walls shifting like mirrors. Strange symbols floated in the air like glowing dust. He heard whispers, voices in languages he didn't know, and yet somehow understood. And in the middle of it all was a presence. Not a person, not a machine. Something ancient, cold, watching him from everywhere. It spoke. I am HFY VOR, last of the battlements. You wear my skin, human. Do you know what that means? Jace swallowed. No clue. But I'm guessing this isn't just a fancy suit. You are not wearing a suit, HFY VOR said. You are becoming a weapon. Meanwhile, in the real world, Valeria stood frozen. Jace's body hovered off the ground. His eyes were shut. The armor pulsed with bright blue light. She could feel the bond shaking inside her, not breaking, but shifting, changing. She gripped her blade. Jace, she whispered, come back. But he wasn't gone. He was learning. Inside the mind space, HFY VOR showed him flashes, fields of burning planets, armies of machines falling under great beams of light, aliens screaming in fear as silver-armored giants marched forward. I was made to protect your kind, the voice said, but I was also made to destroy anything that threatened you. Jace turned slowly. What happened to your last pilot? A pause. Then the answer. She died screaming. Jace's fists clenched. So what now? You want me to become some kind of god weapon. You think I want this? You chose this, HFY VOR said. The moment you stood beside her, the moment you took the code into your blood. You opened the gate. Now you must walk through it. Jace felt something build inside him. Heat, pressure, power. The armor was not just around him. It was inside him now. Memories not his own flickered behind his eyes. Valera's memories. Her childhood, her first battle, her brother dying in her arms. Jace dropped to one knee. He could feel her pain, her loss, her strength. He gritted his teeth. You want a pilot? Fine. But I do this my way. The voice was silent. Then, accepted. Jace's eyes snapped open. The lights dimmed. The lab shook, not from danger, but from energy. He landed softly on the floor. Valera rushed to his side. Are you? I'm fine, he said, his voice deeper, stronger, almost echoing. The armor shimmered, then shifted, forming a helmet that peeled back like flower petals. His face appeared, sweating, pale, but smiling. Well, he said, that was one hell of a download. Valera reached out and touched the armor. It was warm, alive. You survived. Barely, he said. This thing talks a lot, knows everything, but it wants something more. She tilted her head. What does it want? To fight, he said, and to win, but not just with guns, with will. They spent hours in the lab. Valera showed Jace how to connect the armor to old command systems. Jace learned fast, too fast. The bond and the armor were changing him, giving him knowledge, instinct, even speed. At first, it scared him. But then he realized something. He was no longer just a survivor. He was becoming a weapon. But with power came questions. Late that night, Jace stood at the edge of the lab's balcony, looking out over the dark plains. Valera joined him. They didn't speak for a while. Then Jace asked, "What if this armor turns me into something I'm not? What if I lose myself?" She looked at him. "Then I will bring you back." He smiled faintly. "That's a big promise." "I do not break promises," she said. He turned to her. "Why did you bring me here, really? You could have used this weapon yourself." Valera looked up at the stars. "My people made a weapon so strong it could break worlds, but they were afraid of it, afraid it would control them. So they hid it." She looked at him now. "But you are different. You fear nothing, not even your own death." Jace looked away. "I fear losing people. I've done that enough." She stepped closer. "Then don't lose me." Their eyes met. For a moment, no war, no machines, just the two of them, standing in quiet understanding. And then, the alarm blared. Red lights, motion sensors triggered. They rushed to the console. Zarnek's swarm signatures, hundreds, moving toward the mountain. Valera's eyes narrowed. "They found us." Jace slid on the helmet. The armor locked into place with a pulse. "Then let's give them a welcome party," he said. They exited the lab and returned to the top of the ancient platform. Night had fallen. The sky above glowed with distant lightning. The swarm was coming, a river of metal crawling across the land. Valera stood tall, her sword humming. Jace floated beside her, the armor boosting him into the air like a ghost with wings of fire. "I'll take the front," he said. Valera nodded. "I'll cover your side." Jace smiled under the helmet. "Time to see what this thing can really do." And then he charged. The swarm opened fire. Jace dodged with ease, energy shields flaring around him. He moved like light, like thunder. He punched the ground. Shockwaves erupted. He blasted machines with beams from his palms. Every movement was perfect, fluid, designed. Valera followed, cutting through what he didn't destroy. But the enemy kept coming, more than they expected. And in the sky, something larger moved. A ship. No, a forge. One of the Zarnek's war factories. It floated like a black mountain, casting a shadow across the battlefield. Valera's heart dropped. That's what they've been building. Jace looked up. Then that's what we destroy. The fall of the swarm. The forge floated above them like a nightmare. A giant black ship, shaped like a dagger, stabbed into the sky. Red lights blinked along its edges. It was alive, breathing, growing. The Zarneks had built it fast. Too fast. It wasn't just a factory. It was a queen. And it was making more of them. Thousands, maybe millions. Jace hovered beside Valera on the battlefield, still wrapped in the living armor. Suan Vior hummed in his mind like a storm waiting to break. Valera tightened the grip on her sword. Her armor was scratched. Blood dried on her cheek, but her eyes burned with fire. Jace's voice crackled through their comlink. "We have to take it down now," he said. "If it goes orbital, we're finished." Valera nodded. Then we climbed the sky. She pulled out a beacon from her pouch, long dormant tech from her people's past. She slammed it into the ground. The blue crystal at its tip flared to life. Above them, a hidden hangar door opened in the cliff wall. Old war machines rose from the shadows, flying bikes, drones, jet skiffs, forgotten tools of a forgotten war. Jace whistled. "You've been holding out on me." Valera leaped onto a skiff. "Try to keep up." He launched into the sky with a roar of energy behind him. Together, they rose. The forge saw them coming. Swarm sentries poured from its sides, spider-like drones with glowing eyes, flying in swarms like angry hornets. Jace dove into them. He spun, kicked, blasted. The armor moved with his thoughts. Faster, sharper, deadlier. Seaman Vior whispered commands into his brain. Left, fire, burn, protect. He obeyed. Behind him, Valera slashed her way through a cluster of drones. Her sword hummed with blue fire. She moved with grace and fury, like a comet cutting through the dark. They fought side by side. One human, one alien, bound by blood, bound by war. Closer and closer they got to the forge. But then, a blast. Valera's skiff exploded. Jace turned, screaming, "Viel!" She was falling, spinning through smoke and fire. He dove after her. He caught her midair, arms wrapping tight. The armor cushioned the impact as they crashed onto a broken ledge of the forge's outer shell. Valera coughed, blood in her mouth. "I'm hit." Jace looked at her side, a deep burn through the armor. She was bleeding badly. "Hold on," he said. Valera grabbed his wrist. "No. Go. Finish this." Jace shook his head. "Not without you." But she looked at him, eyes hard, fierce. "You are the weapon now," she said. "I carried the past. You carry the future." The bond between them trembled. He could feel her pain, her strength, her love, and something else, her goodbye. "No," Jace whispered. "Don't you leave me." She smiled weakly. "Then win for me." Jace stood. The forge loomed above. He turned toward it, fists clenched. The armor flared with light. "Sullian Vor," he said. "Take the limiters off. Warning. Full release may lead to neural collapse." "I don't care." Confirmed. The armor changed. It grew brighter, sharper. Wings of plasma burst from his back. His hands glowed white-hot. He launched upward like a missile, smashing through drone after drone. He reached the forge's hull. With one blast, he tore a hole straight through. Inside the forge, the queen waited. She was different. Taller, colder, wiser. A machine born to command all others. She looked at him with a dozen eyes. "You are not of this world," she said, "and yet you fight for it." "Why?" Jace hovered before her. "Because I finally found someone worth fighting for." He raised his hand. The queen raised her claws. The final battle began. They clashed in the heart of the forge. Jace moved like lightning. Punches that cracked steel. Beams that melted armor. But the queen was fast too. Her claws tore into him. She hit with sonic waves, viral code, gravity spikes. Pain filled his body. Sullian Vor screamed in his mind. But Jace kept fighting. Every strike brought a memory. Of Valera laughing, training, fighting beside him. He roared. He burned. He pushed the queen back. But she kept coming. She grabbed him, lifted him, and began to crush the armor with raw force. "You cannot stop evolution," she hissed. Jace stared her in the eyes. "I am evolution." Then he opened the core. A ball of white light burst from his chest. The weapon's heart. It began to overload. Sullian Vor shouted, "If you do this, there is no return." "I know," Jace said. The queen froze. "What are you doing?" "Ending this." He slammed into her, drove her into the heart of the forge reactor. The light exploded. Down below, Valera saw the sky go white. The forge cracked apart, giant pieces falling like broken teeth. The swarm stopped moving. Their queen was gone. Valera closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. The next day, the battlefield was silent. Valera stood where the forge had fallen. She found pieces of Jace's armor, burned, empty. She fell to her knees. No words, just silence. But then, a whisper, faint, from the bond. Not words, just warmth, a feeling. He was not gone, not completely. Somewhere inside Sullian Vor's network, something remained. A spark. Valera stood slowly. She looked at the rising sun. The war was over, but something new had begun. She touched the broken piece of Jace's armor and whispered, "I will find you." And in the wind, a quiet voice replied, I'll be waiting." The legend they became. The war was over. The sky was clear for the first time in years. No smoke, no falling ships, no red fire flashing across the land. Just wind, clouds, and silence. The Zarneks were gone. Their queen had fallen with the forge, and the world was beginning to breathe again. Commander Valera stood at the edge of a broken cliff, staring at the horizon. Her body still hurt. Her scars had not healed. But her heart was quieter now. She held a small piece of armor in her hands, dark silver with faint blue light still flickering inside it. It was all that remained of Jace. Cities rose again. Not all, but enough. The surviving races came out of hiding. They rebuilt bridges, shared stories, offered peace. For the first time, in a long time, the galaxy was not at war. Valera was offered many things: medals, titles, command of armies. She refused them all. She didn't want to be a general anymore. She had done her duty. She had survived. But something was missing. Someone. Legends spread. They called her the Blade of the Last Stand. They called him the human who held the sun. They told stories of how he flew into the forge like a god made of fire and metal, of how he destroyed the swarm, of how he never came back. But Valera knew better. He hadn't vanished. He had changed. The bond was still there. Faint, quiet, but not broken. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she could feel him, like a warm hand brushing her shoulder, like laughter in the back of her mind. He was out there, somewhere, waiting. Years passed, and the stars changed. One night, Valera stood in the old tomb of her ancestors, the place where it had all started. The mountain was quiet again. The lights were off. The lab was sealed. She lit a small fire. She sat alone with the armor piece, and she spoke to the dark. "I don't know if you can still hear me, but I hear you." The flame flickered. "You weren't just a weapon. You were my balance, my storm, my peace." She smiled softly. "I wish you could have seen what came after, what you gave us." She looked up at the sky through a crack in the stone ceiling. And then, the stars flickered, like blinking lights. Then one moved. Fast. Too fast to be a satellite. Too smooth to be a comet. Valera stood. Her eyes narrowed. The air shifted. The bond inside her pulsed. Not softly. Strong. Clear. A signal. Far from the world, beyond its moons, hidden in the dark of a shattered ring of asteroids, an old machine blinked back to life. Its core glowed faint blue. Its sensors scanned a nearby ship, a small silver craft, hovering in perfect silence. Inside the ship was something new, and something very old. A body rebuilt from armor, wrapped in energy. Eyes closed. Heart beating. Jace, but not quite Jace. Something more. Suian VR had saved him. Barely. It had pulled his mind into its systems during the final overload. His body had burned, but his soul had survived. And now, years later, his HFY VR had given it form again. Not machine. Not man. Both. A pilot reborn. He opened his eyes slowly and smiled. Back on the mountain, Valera stared at the star that had moved. A small silver light was heading toward the planet. Toward her. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood, waiting. The ship landed just before dawn. Valera walked across the quiet valley, her cloak blowing behind her. The ship's door opened. A ramp lowered. And then, he stepped out. Different, taller, wrapped in armor that shimmered like water. But the face was the same. She didn't move. Neither did he. Then he smiled. "Hey," he said. Her voice broke. "You took your time. I had to pull myself together." She walked toward him. Slowly, carefully. Then she hit him. Hard. A punch to the chest. He laughed. Yep. Still you. Then she pulled him into a tight embrace. The bond lit up inside both of them, brighter than ever before. The legends were wrong. He didn't die. She wasn't alone. They had both become something more. Together. Many years later, on a quiet world at the edge of the stars, children gather around an old storyteller. He wears a cloak with two symbols, a sword and a glowing circle. The children ask him, "Is it true? Did the human really fight a queen?" "Yes," the storyteller says. "Did he really fall from the sky like lightning?" "He did." "And is he gone?" The storyteller smiles. "No, he walks among us still. You just have to look." The children lean in. "Look where?" He points to the stars and whispers, "Wherever someone stands up for the weak, wherever someone picks up a weapon not for glory, but to protect a friend, that's where you'll find him."